My name is Güray Özkay, and I'm the Director of Architectural Design at Atelier. And for those of you who are not familiar with who we are and what we do, we are a multidisciplinary strategic design and innovation consultancy and explanation, which is worthy of a 2-hour lecture on itself. What we do is we transform people, places, experiences, and communities. We help leaders of organization and governmental bodies to help with the impact they create via transformation of these spaces. That's my job primarily, and we do that through a community-powered lens. A little bit of spoiler alert, the words community, spaces, transformation are the words you're going to hear about the most. We are a company born out of Istanbul. Our main base is over there. We have been very busy in the Middle East with our second base in Dubai for the last 6 years. We have recently set up shop in Amsterdam, and although we've been active for the last couple of years in Riyadh, we are in the process of setting up shop here too. What we do is, both on our own and with our fellow wonderful Q sister companies like Gale and IDEO and SYP, what we do is we create spaces on a variety of scales, from indoor spaces to architectural to urban design to very complex multidisciplinary strategic spatial strategy projects that are deeply rooted in architecture. And we do that with some very cool clients. Of course, more often than not, these interior design projects are workspaces. We have designed some for the likes of the Dubai Future Foundation and the DIFC, currently for the Central Bank, or also we create projects in the disciplines of hospitality and education and culture for the likes of NEOM to Qatar museums and everything in between. Of course, the common thing about our clients, especially in the Middle East, is that they really love their secrecy and their confidentiality, which puts me in a pretty difficult and awkward position when I come to events like this to talk about what we do with practically nothing to show you. So that's why I prefer to talk about how we approach things, what is our methodology and mindset, and I really hope you find it as interesting as I do. What's been on my mind lately? A couple of months ago, I was again here in Riyadh in one of our many trips, and to a very small room full of people, I talked about this. And then, and especially now, I've been traveling a lot. I've been spending most of my time on airplanes, being exposed to a lot of different places, of course, each with their own unique landscape and built environment. But what's even more exciting and impressive is that these spaces, these places, have their own unique communities, their own lives, their own lifestyles, and their own approaches. So I don't know if it's all this variety that I've been exposed to. I found myself feeling somewhat philosophical lately, and I've been thinking about a lot about how we do the things we do. So, in essence, we are in the business of change. That's what we do. Not just us in the creative industry, but the organizations and the people we work with and we work for, they're all agents of change as well. If they're government bodies coming up with new education curriculums, trying to find new ways to engage children, creating museums, or creating new districts, new neighborhoods, creating new methodologies on distributing cultural heritage and new ways of incorporating them into everything we do, they're all part of change and transformation, and that's what we help the leaders with. And even when we're designing from scratch, even it's a new project, I still consider that transformation, because we're never creating out of thin air. That's not what we do. There's always a place and people at the start. That's the bare minimum of ingredients of anything we do. That's the bare minimum list of ingredients for a need to arise for our existence as designers and the ones in the creative industry. And many of you are familiar with this diagram. There are a lot of methodologies on why and how change happens. There are a lot of approaches. You can see a lot of different methodologies from design companies and consultancies all around the world. And I was forced by my team to do this as well. More often than not, this is the methodology for how change happens. But what I've been really thinking about lately is not how change happens, but where it takes place. And I mean this in kind of an abstract and philosophical way. You see, to me, there are two interfaces to life, to our existence. Bear with me, this gets really interesting. The first one is the tangible interface, which is spaces. It's the physical world around us. It's where we interact with one another. It's where we interact with life. It's where we interact with physical objects. It is where life happens. And the second and intangible interface is language. This is the primary plane of our existence. This is how we communicate with each other, not just each other. This is so primordial that it is where we shape our thoughts and ideas. So these are the two interfaces where life happens. This is the basis of our existence. And yes, I've been busy thinking about all of this. And a couple of months ago, I was rewatching an old movie, something I saw before, a Jean-Luc Godard movie called Two Things I Know About Her. And in this movie, there's a beautiful scene where a young boy asks his mother, "Mom, what is language?" To which his mother replies, "Language is the house man lives in." Now, I was really moved by this, defining language using an architectural typology and a physical space. It was really, really interesting to me, and I was mad at myself not catching this earlier, because later I remembered this is a direct quote from German philosopher Martin Heidegger. Language is the house man lives in. And it got me thinking, yes, there is this beautiful, strong link between language and space, yes. And what made it much more interesting for me, and I promise you this is the truth, while I was watching this movie, on the coffee table I had a book I've been reading by this great Turkish author called Beliz Güçbilmez. The book is called Zaman, Zemin, Zuhur. Doesn't sound great, all that great in English. It means time, plane, and emergence. It's a light book about anthropology, how we view life, but it uses theater as a lens. And it says, it is not a coincidence that the art form and the space it takes place in are both called theater. And I found that really fascinating. Again, a linguistic link between life, people, and space themselves. So I started thinking on my own. I stopped the movie, and I thought, I'll give you a couple of examples. The Turkish word for mosque is cami, which comes from the word cemaat, which means community. Similarly, the Turkish word for church is kilise, or chiesa in Italian, or église in French. It comes from the ancient Greek word ekklesia, which means to get together or community. I said, let's make a trinity here and go for one more religious building. And synagogue, again, is the combination of two ancient Greek words. It means to bring together, to get together, and community. Of course, religion is one of the very basic foundations of bringing people together and creating communities, and of course building spaces around them. But it just doesn't end there. When you look a little bit deeper, mura in Japanese, pueblo in Spanish, or kula in Finnish, these are all words that represent physical spaces, villages, groups of houses, but they also refer to communities. Now, at this point, I was really, really excited, but it would have been much more perfect if I had thought of all of this by myself, but I didn't. About 100 years ago, this amazing German man called Walter Benjamin wrote this beautifully titled article in which he discussed something called the language of things, where he says we can treat everything as language. And then he goes on to discuss then what is the role of the translator, and he gets into a very interesting linguistic and literary discussion. But what is really interesting to me is, as an architect, yes, what if we treat everything as language? Does that mean I can treat communities and people as language too, among other things? And does that make my job as an architect, the act of architectural design, an act of translation? And that really struck a string really deep inside. And I started to think about a translator's workflow. Of course, this is a basic version of it, but what does a translator do? They familiarize themselves with the subject matter, they understand it, they interpret it, and then they rewrite it in another language. Basically, all translation is rewriting. So, what happens as us designers, architects, we treat communities and people as language. We try to really understand them, really try to interpret the situation they're in, their hopes, their dreams, their ambitions, their needs, their necessities, and rewrite that in architecture, translate that into spaces. And this is not some philosophical framework that I wanted to create from ground up. Oh, this is how we want to work. No, this is me looking back in hindsight on all the work that we have been doing at Atelier with the beautiful team that we have. This is how we have been engaging communities. And once we put people in the very core of our understanding and translate everything we know about them into spaces, in the end product, when we are done with a project, it is inevitable that people are at the very heart of it. And that makes it fail-proof. That makes it inevitably socially sustainable, functionally sustainable. Surprisingly enough, this makes it economically sustainable. And if you can manage to make it environmentally sustainable too, you hit the sustainability jackpot. And this is what we've been doing. And I know when I talk about it like this, it sounds extremely romantic and vague and abstract, but it is a very tangible and scientific process of our work. What we do is we go out and talk to people. We interview them, we spend time with them, we do surveys, we take videos and photographs. There are a lot of post-its involved, so much that I should have called them to be my sponsor, actually. And then what we do is we dilute all the information, we distill all the information down. We do a lot of analysis, cross-referencing, mapping, seeing patterns, seeing all the correlations in between. And when it gets playful or to straight very complex procedures, we even leverage digital tools to first digitize all the information we gather from communities and people, and we leverage AI tools to help us understand very quickly the relationship between all the interviews, photographs, videos, everything we hear, see, and collect. And this is regardless of scale. When we're transforming one room from before to after, we engage the community involved. When we're designing a kindergarten and an elementary school, we definitely engage the community that is involved. We start with the kids, You cannot believe the amount of insight they bring to a school redesign project. And what this ends up with is ownership. When communities are included in design processes from day one, when the building or the space or the transformation is complete, they are rightful owners of that process and the end product. So what we're suggesting is making people not just the final recipient of a project, but the actual ingredient and the tool of the process, so interweaving people and spaces using a methodology. So we're going up in scale. We started with one room to a school, then a workspace. The previous one was a workspace, and this is a 4 or 5 kilometer long park here in the Middle East that we wanted to transform to the social heart of the city. Of course, this involves community engagement, and at the very top of the scale, we can do this nationwide, where we talk about the cultural, economical, and natural assets of an entire nation and how we create a new urban strategy for them. The go-to response is for us to go to those communities and really understand them and weave them into the solution itself. Yes, and these last two were examples about us revitalizing historical districts, and this example is, again, this is the very smallest scale of our work, where we look at heritage building techniques and materials. Again, this requires a lot of involvement from the community. So in a nutshell, what I'm trying to advocate to you is, whatever the scale, whatever the typology, for any transformation project, especially spatial transformation, to succeed, it is crucial for every single stakeholder, from end users to participants. They're engaged from the very first phase of design. What we need to understand and interpret their needs and weave that into the solutions themselves. So if any of this has resonated with you, if you find any of this bit interesting, at Atelier we are all about conversation. Please do not hesitate to reach out and ask questions. We would love nothing more to talk to you more about it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Bilal, and I'm from India. I run a visualization studio, and we also are looking, when we work with architects, we have a lot of exposure to architecture because we are working with a lot of architects and designers as clients. So it's also a case study on how architecture is evolving, because I'm also an architect. So with community. So, but like, brilliant presentation. But I also wanted to understand, like, when you begin with the concepts of what community means in today's age, where we are connected in more ways than one. Like, yes, publicly we are connected, on the street we are connected, and also as architects, when we are designing these spaces, we say interactive spaces, but it's not a lot of strangers interacting with one another, to be honest. Like, if we see our public parks, it's not like a lot of strangers interacting. So it's interaction in that sense is very different, also in terms of community. And with the changing world, like even Discord is a community right now, like if you think of those things. So when you sit and when you start to interpret these ideas of what community means, like what is the framework for sort of those concepts to begin with? Like, it's understandable with the examples that you showed in the schools and all, that's fine. But with the changing world, with new technology and everything, how much of that are you able to put in terms of your unique framework with every project? How would you like define that? Like, how would you define where to begin with in terms of how much to consider in terms of community? Like, it's just trying to understand that.
Yeah, actually, that's an excellent question, because depending on the type of project and the location and the function, what we understand from the word community changes drastically. The example you gave is a great one. When it's a school, it's a term I learned very freshly from my colleague Henry here, called captive audiences. The community in a school is a captive audience. They're a predefined community. You know who they are, and you know how many they are. You know their names. But in some projects, first of all, in all of our projects, we never start with the concept design phase. For us, there's a phase 0, which is the strategy, research, and immersion phase. And we don't take that lightly. Sometimes we end up taking weeks just getting to the stage where we can say, okay, now we can start comfortably designing for these people. More often than not, the first thing we do is first identifying the communities, because in some instances there are micro communities within spaces that have nothing to do with each other. We look at ways of finding a network of connection. Can we bring these micro communities together? Do they need to come together? What would happen if they come together? So we not only identify them, but we also help build them. And when we are engaging our stakeholders, we see them as partners in the projects. If we can come up with a logical solution that we can benefit from bringing these micro communities together and physically putting them in spaces together so that they can interact with one another or interact with the space, and we can benefit from that. And then we ask the question, how might we create the space that will enable this interaction? But we only do that if there's a logical reason to do it in the first place. So it is a very steep pitfall that many designers fall in, that you go, okay, we're going to create a space and people are going to interact with it. If you just create the space, people don't do anything because the others are strangers. And why do I go out and touch strangers on the street? What we do is we understand every micro community. If there are none, we ask the stakeholders, is there a need for us to build a community here, and how might we do that? And that's where our multidisciplinary aspect comes in, because Atelier is not just a group of architects, we are a group of community builders, experience and service designers, and learning designers. So we craft this very complex multidisciplinary approaches to first building the community or identifying the community, and then designing the spaces for them just to suit their needs for a better quality of life, so to speak. Okay, in that case, thank you very much. We have no further questions. Thank you.